This whole ordeal went down back in 2017 while I was residing in St. Petersburg, Florida. I've always been someone who prefers staying indoors, so when my coworker Jenna, someone roughly a decade younger than me, started constantly pushing me to get out and socialize, I kept turning her down. However, Jenna and another colleague named Mira weren't going to give up easily, and after repeated invitations over several weeks, I eventually caved. I committed to joining them for an evening out the following Saturday. As that weekend drew closer, Jenna showed up at my place. She wanted to leave her vehicle there and have me behind the wheel, which immediately made me anxious. I'd been in St. Pete for 4 years, but because I hardly ventured beyond my own area, I had zero knowledge of the club scene. The farthest I typically drove was about 4 miles to grab groceries at Walmart. Anything beyond that, and I'd be completely lost without my GPS navigation. So that night, we loaded up my car and headed toward Mira's place. Upon arrival, Mira wasn't quite prepared, so we went inside and waited for her. Once she was ready, all 3 of us got back into my vehicle. Since I was driving, that made Jenna my navigator. We eventually found ourselves at a packed nightclub. We made our way inside, claimed a table, and ordered some cocktails. We hadn't been there very long when Jenna announced she'd spotted an acquaintance and asked Mira to accompany her. I felt a sharp jolt of frustration. Why push me so hard to come along just to ditch me almost immediately? But I stuck it out. Not long after, the 2 of them returned with smiles on their faces. My friend wanted to buy us drinks, Jenna said, handing me a glass. I had no reason to distrust her since we worked together, so I accepted the drink, just as they did. I'm fairly certain Jenna's friend purchased 2 rounds for each of us. However, it wasn't much time after consuming that 3rd drink when something felt seriously off. The space didn't begin spinning, yet a sudden wave of thick, intense dread flooded over me. I grabbed Jenna and said we needed to leave immediately. What happened over the next several hours is pretty much a fog. I can't recall actually exiting the venue, but apparently we did. The earliest clear memory I have is being seated in the driver's seat of my car outside Mira's residential complex. I could hear Jenna and Mira having a conversation, and something they said, some phrase or combination of words that I still can't remember clearly, triggered my body's alarm system. I didn't need to comprehend the actual words. My instinct screamed that something dangerous was happening. I threw the car into drive and accelerated away. Whatever substance someone had mixed into my drink was potent. I'm not someone who gets drunk easily, and I'd only had 3 drinks that typically get watered down at clubs. I was driving all around St. Petersburg, struggling to concentrate, just trying to figure out a route back to my apartment. But my thinking was completely scrambled. At one point, I stopped at a traffic light. Out of nowhere, 2 figures showed up at my window, and then I felt someone yanking my door open. I was completely stunned. My car's doors should have locked automatically once I put it in drive. I have absolutely no clue how they managed to open that door. 2 unknown men were actively trying to force the door wider, and seeing them snapped me partially out of my mental haze long enough to hit the accelerator and speed away from that intersection. Following that moment of pure panic, everything goes black again in my memory. The next thing I can clearly remember, I was sitting in my car parked along a quiet residential street. I was staring at my phone, struggling intensely just to figure out how to use it, but the drug had made me so anxious and disoriented that even the simplest task felt overwhelming. I looked around, saw nobody, and decided I was safe enough for now. I reclined my seat and passed out into a deep, chemically induced sleep. I regained consciousness around 5 in the morning, as the drug was finally wearing off. I could finally operate my phone. I activated my GPS and drove straight back home, collapsing into bed right away. I woke again around 11 in the morning to discover 20 missed calls, most from Jenna, but several from a concerned friend too. When I finally called Jenna back, she was panicked, demanding to know where I disappeared to. "What's that supposed to mean?" I answered. "Your friend poisoned my drink, so I wasn't staying around to see what was going to happen," I explained. Then Jenna said something absolutely chilling. "Well, those poisoned drinks weren't intended for you." That simple statement was all I needed to confirm her involvement. She quickly mentioned she'd come by later to retrieve her vehicle. Before she arrived, I suddenly remembered those two men prying open my door with vivid clarity. Was it real, or just a hallucination from the drug? I headed out to inspect my vehicle, and sure enough, the plastic trim covering my driver's door handle was completely gone. Whoever was gripping that handle when I took off must have torn it completely away. The physical proof confirmed that the fear I experienced wasn't imaginary. Someone had attempted to get into my vehicle when I was under the influence, operating a car alone and completely defenseless. I was absolutely livid that Jenna had gotten me into such a catastrophic situation. I never communicated with her again. The core message of this horrifying experience is straightforward, and it's the core reason I'm alive today. Always listen to what your body is telling you. Your internal compass never misleads you. I'm a young person who resides in a vibrant seaside community situated in a compact nation. During the summer months, it draws massive numbers of tourists, while other parts of the year are considerably slower. Our town's primary draw is a beautiful coastline stretching several kilometers, ending at impressive sand formations that make for an excellent hiking route. The dunes themselves are deceptively easy to navigate. It's simple to become disoriented, yet equally simple to get yourself back out, because a 15-minute walk in virtually any direction will put you back on the main beach or lead you to the vehicle lot. The walk from that vehicle lot typically takes about 15 to 20 minutes at a reasonable pace, so you're never really cut off from civilization. During daylight hours, you'll consistently observe families with small children, enjoying strolls, or someone taking their dog for a walk. My essential point is that these sand formations are considered low risk during daylight, and if you somehow get turned around in there, panicking won't help. This particular incident happened a few weeks into the new school year, meaning the town had fewer tourists, and the sunsets happened earlier. My companions and I participate in the local scouting organization. Our organization is organized into 4 separate divisions: Beavers for ages 5 to 8, Cubs for 9 to 12, Scouts for 12 to 15, and Ventures for ages 16 to 18. We convene every Thursday evening from 7 to 9 o'clock, sometimes indoors and sometimes outside, depending on the season. On this specific evening, it was the Scouts' initial meeting following the summer holidays. So following established protocol, we gathered at the vehicle lot adjacent to the dune path, and the Scouts proceeded to the sand formations. We'd have the experienced Scouts climb the most significant sand hill, and then the newer Scouts, the 12-year-olds, would pursue them so the veteran Scouts could mentor the newcomers in reaching the peak. And once accomplished, they officially achieved Scout status. The Scouts departed while me and the remaining 8 Ventures remained behind to work on our emergency response training for approximately 45 minutes. We performed fairly decently at that, and we concluded we had enough time to go check out the dunes ourselves. The faster-paced walkers, including me, reached the dunes initially. The ocean was at its maximum level, so we weren't able to traverse along the beach to reach the primary sand hill, which everyone called the Baldy Man. so we just navigated through the additional formations. My companion, who I'll refer to as Noah, and I were determined to catch up with the scouts, who by that point had all made it up the Baldy Man. We called out to our instructor and the remaining ventures about our intentions, and 2 additional individuals decided to join us, who I'll call Thomas and Ewan. The rest were considerably further behind, so they went in groups of 2 and split up at set locations, which allowed our 4-person group to navigate and discover our way back. So the 4 of us, me, Noah, Thomas, and Ewan, took off across the nearly completely dark sand formations, stumbling and falling repeatedly, ascending and descending endless hills, while scraping our skin on the spiky vegetation and occasional thorny branches. The moonlight illuminated the distant outline of the scouts, and they were significantly more distant than we initially thought. We took a pause on a hilltop, where we looked behind and observed 2 additional ventures observing us from a distance. We raised our hands and they did the same. I was securing the cap on my water bottle, preparing to resume sprinting, when Thomas raised his hand and made a quiet noise to get our attention. He appeared somewhat anxious initially, though he seemed to brush it off. We questioned him regarding why he'd signaled us to be silent, and he said, "Did you catch that sound?" We indicated we hadn't, so Thomas mentioned he believed he'd heard movement in the brush, but we attributed it to the wind, despite the fact that it was an unusually calm evening. After another approximately 10 minutes, we were on the concluding hilltop prior to reaching the scouts, and we were exhausted. Yet we persisted and summited. We exchanged greetings with our companions and the scouts, acknowledged the newest members, and concluded we had to make our return journey, because it was now essentially pitch dark, and additionally, we didn't have flashlights. We rolled down the large hill, regaining our balance on the sand surface, and we began making our return toward the ventures we'd observed on the hilltop. We ascended and descended the formations repeatedly until we could distinguish the shape of the hilltop we'd seen them on. They remained in that position. We experienced relief seeing them still there, even though we'd anticipated they would be. Eventually, the 4 of us approached them. I'll refer to these 2 as Cormac and Alice. Cormac is an athletically built individual and is recognized at school for being highly intelligent. He's approximately 6'3" and appears as though he could win a fight against a large animal. Alice is a reserved individual, but exceptionally intelligent, academically and in her interactions with people. Despite the darkness, I could observe absolute fear displayed on Cormac's appearance, combined with Alice visibly quivering next to him. What exactly is going on? Cormac looks me directly in the eyes and asks, "Were you wandering around down there by yourself?" Pointing down to an opening in the formations where individuals might congregate to consume beverages or smoke cigarettes. "No, I was accompanied the entire time." "What's this about?" I replied, experiencing my heartbeat increasing substantially. I think all of us experienced the very same realization simultaneously. We practically experienced our blood turning frigid. Alice and I observed a person dressed completely in dark clothing, with his hood elevated, circling that clearing, deliberately steering clear of us. "We initially thought it was you, but it seemed entirely atypical for you," Cormac said, directing his attention toward me. I started to respond, but Cormac persisted. He continued, "When we acknowledged you from that other hilltop, we hadn't yet noticed this individual, but the moment you departed from it, we observed what appears to be the same individual standing precisely where you'd been, observing your direction. That's when it truly struck me, and I experienced continuous chills throughout my body. Thomas must have detected him moving around when we were positioned up there. We had someone pursuing us. Having multiple individuals nearby provides security, so all 6 of us made our direction toward the clearing where the person had been observed. He didn't even possess a light source, Alice mentioned with a shaky voice. Cormac and Alice sprinted toward the scouts to alert their supervisors about what was occurring, whereas the remaining 4 of us remained and kept lookout in the clearing. Cormac and Alice returned quickly following their warning. The surroundings were strangely silent now. We were afraid that this individual, wearing complete darkness, carrying no light, walking in circles, and most concerning, completely isolated in the pitch-dark formations, was going to suddenly appear and assault us. Fortunately, that situation never materialized. We proceeded quickly back to the vehicle lot, discovering the final 3 ventures together with our instructor on our return journey, informing them of what had transpired. We were practically exiting the formations when one of the younger scouts let out a cry, which caused all of them to sprint. Noah and I, who had been at the front of the group, were the ones who went straight to that child. The young boy was crying hard, and when we asked him to describe what happened, he pointed to my left. There he stood, the very same individual, perched on a hilltop, simply watching us. Noah instructed all of us to run, mentioning he'd observed a blade in the man's possession. The ventures each carried the less quick children back to the vehicle lot, which appeared secure as far as we were concerned. I never observed the man's features, nor do I intend to ever discover who he was. The scouts and ventures were picked up by their families, who I believe all possess their own interpretations of the occurrence, but probably just a fraction have knowledge of the complete account. This situation occurred when I was 22 years old. I was employed as a bartender at a modest neighborhood pub, roughly a couple blocks away from my residence. Not an upscale establishment by any means, just a gathering place for regular patrons who'd come get their late-night alcoholic beverages or watch whichever sporting events were broadcasting. I started noticing familiar patrons pretty fast, a large number of them more mature gentlemen. Following my shifts, I'd typically make the journey to my apartment on foot because the distance was minimal, and periodically, I'd participate in a few drinks with patrons as the evening was concluding, so operating a vehicle would have been risky. The stroll required around 7 minutes, and I'd traveled that route so frequently that I never truly experienced concern beforehand. However, there existed one consistent customer who perpetually made me feel uncomfortable. His designation was Jared, which I was aware of from his bank card. He gave the impression of being approximately his late 30s, possibly 38. He had receding hair and perpetually wore the identical tan blazer, independent of the weather conditions. He never came accompanied by companions. He'd be seated at the counter independently and try to engage me in dialogue the entire duration, demonstrating no fascination with any of the athletic competitions I would be displaying. But he'd routinely show up sometime in the later hours regardless. He occasionally posed individual inquiries, and I consistently provided brief responses and attempted to remain professional because that's expected in the industry. But I made an effort not to encourage his advances. One Saturday evening, he came in, as he typically did, around 10 o'clock. He drank a single beer throughout nearly 60 minutes and simply observed me going about my shift. Not like he was constantly gazing intensely at me without pause, but I'd frequently notice him taking repeated looks my direction, and he would avert his gaze when I'd observe. Essentially, every occasion I passed by, he made an effort to chat. Toward the conclusion of his beverage, he inquired if I'd be interested in spending time together outside of my workplace. I informed him I wasn't considering it and that I favored maintaining a separation between my job and my private life. His expression shifted instantaneously. He manufactured a grin, set down several bills, and commented, "Yeah, whatever." Then he exited without providing any gratuity, which represented a departure from his established behavior. I recollect experiencing alleviation when he was no longer present, yet I additionally felt some uneasiness regarding how abruptly his temperament deteriorated. My shift concluded at the stroke of midnight. The second bartender showed up to relieve me, and I totaled up my earnings, collected my jacket, and departed through the entrance. The pavement was unoccupied, as it constantly is at that late hour. I just turned onto the subsequent street when I heard my name being announced. My stomach immediately sank. I rotated around and discovered Jared positioned alongside a streetlight. I hadn't even recognized him coming up to me. He gave a subtle gesture and began approaching me. I paused, but maintained distance between us. He expressed regret regarding his dramatic departure moments before, and explained that he's inclined to experience stress. I assured him everything was acceptable, yet that I genuinely needed to go back to my residence. He concurred and continued. "I simply desired to request one additional moment. Would you be willing to provide your Instagram or Snapchat or anything similar? I guarantee I won't bother you anymore." I answered that I don't participate in digital platforms. He stayed silent for a moment, then produced a smile that triggered uneasiness in me. He responded, "That's peculiar, since I'm quite certain I viewed you on Instagram at the establishment previously." My pulse quickened significantly because now he was directly confronting me about something. I had zero understanding of how he possessed this information. I basically responded, "I'd appreciate it if you would leave me be, since at this juncture he'd crossed beyond my comfort zone." He persisted in grinning and said, "Absolutely. Enjoy your evening." I rotated back around and resumed my journey, attempting to manage my anxiety. Following a brief moment, I sensed footsteps following behind me. Initially, I attempted to convince myself I was overthinking the situation. Yet when I snuck a glance backward, I spotted him going the identical path, approximately half a street away. I quickened my walk slightly. He quickened his as well. I slowed my pace. He did the same. It resembled some kind of twisted match, similar to being an automated character in a digital game instructed to replicate my movements. I persisted in walking in the direction of my building, optimistic he might branch off somewhere else. However, he didn't. Upon reaching my residence, I went across the pavement rather than proceeding straight toward the entrance. I paused and looked behind me. He halted as well. He merely remained underneath a tree, predominantly enshrouded in darkness. I wasn't able to make out his facial characteristics distinctly, yet I somehow sensed he was grinning a little. I exclaimed, "Exactly why are you pursuing me? I won't have a choice but to request assistance if this continues." He produced no answer. He simply remained in place, unmoving. I suddenly announced that my significant other inhabits with me. I'm about to go inside and retrieve him immediately. That was fabricated. I actually dwelled independently. I reverted and hurried toward my building's entrance. I moved rapidly and input the entry code. The barrier beeped and the lock disengaged for a couple seconds. Just as I pulled it open, I experienced quick footsteps coming up from behind. I checked behind and spotted Jared sprinting toward the structure. I dashed in and permitted the barrier to slam closed. I didn't remain to verify if it shut securely. I simply sprinted up the stairway to the second floor. My living space was positioned at the terminal of the passage. I could detect the lower entrance being forcefully pushed open, followed by feet pounding up the stairs rapidly. He'd made it through. I struggled with my keys at my apartment entrance, almost dropping them. I could detect him becoming more proximate, his feet banging violently against every step. I eventually managed to insert the key and flung myself through, shutting the door and engaging the mechanism just as he arrived at my floor. An instant afterward, his complete body collided with my entrance. The strikes caused the entire doorframe and surrounding wall to shake. I shrieked and stepped backward, getting my communication device. He pummeled the entrance once more, with greater intensity, as if he was attempting to demolish it. At that moment, I heard another residence's entrance open in the hallway, and a man's yell, "What in the world are you attempting?" The strikes ceased. There was a momentary absence of noise, then footsteps retreating quickly. I peered through the peephole and noticed my neighbor, an older gentleman who inhabited the adjacent space. He was positioned in the passage, looking bewildered and enraged. Jared had already made it halfway down the staircase, not communicating anything. My neighbor rapped gently and asked if I was unharmed. I opened my entrance partially, quivering and expressing tears. I described everything to him, while he positioned himself in the passage with me. He indicated he'd caught the pounding and believed someone might be attempting to break in. I reached out to law enforcement, and they showed up that evening and addressed the circumstance with maximum seriousness. I supplied them Jared's designation from his bank card at the pub, and the building superintendent obtained the recorded surveillance that demonstrated him running behind me. My supervisor additionally supplied them the pub's recordings. The subsequent day, an official contacted me and advised me they'd found him identified as Jared Perez, and that investigators were transferring the matter to the prosecutor's division. It would be prosecuted as criminal stalking plus unlawful entry, given that he pursued me into the building and attempted to force open my apartment entrance. Hearing those phrases made everything feel considerably more tangible, but likewise somewhat comforting. I visited the court building the subsequent morning and petitioned for a protective order. I was required to communicate everything that happened to a magistrate, and they reviewed the law enforcement record and the video evidence. The magistrate granted a preliminary protective order instantaneously, and law enforcement provided him with the documentation soon thereafter. I got informed the prosecutor was advancing with accusations pertaining to his effort to breach my residence. I persisted operating at the pub for a duration following that event, but I discontinued making the journey back alone after dark. Despite having the court directive and the charges, I remained frightened each moment I made my way back to my residence. I would continuously scan my environment during the entire path and move inside as swiftly as I was able. Nothing comparable to that episode transpired again, though I perpetually remembered this circumstance.